when I make a stroke of ink on my journal page, I just made something new. And that was such a pivotal moment where spiritually, I realized that the creative process was helping me connect with God and with hope. Where there was nothing before, I can create something.
Welcome to Permission Slips, a space to practice paying attention to your life with self-compassion so you can experience the wholeness, purpose, and joy you were made for. I'm Jillian DeBritz, a life and leadership coach and a recovering perfectionist, learning alongside you how to give myself permission to be human. I'm so glad you're here with me for this conversation with my friend, Kristen Vanderlip. Kristen, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Hi, Jillian. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's such a joy. Kristen and I have known each other for many years as writers and members of a mastermind group of writers several years ago that we were a part of, where we met monthly and then finally met together in person like 9 months after we initially started meeting together in this cohort. Yeah, I'm just excited to have you here to share your journey as a writer and creator and coach and artist. But before we jump into our conversation, I want people to know who you are. Kristen Vanderlip is a writer, artist, and certified writing coach who's passionate about spreading the love of writing and creativity as paths to healing and hope. After experiencing deep personal grief, Kristen returned to writing and art as ways to process pain, connect with God, and find resilience. She leads guided journaling sessions, workshops, and soul-centered creative practices that support emotional and spiritual healing. Kristen is the founder of the Pen and Men Collective, a writing community where women receive monthly journal prompts, attend virtual writing rooms, and engage in meaningful reflection and conversation, all designed to help them write their way through sorrow and into healing. And I know this is something you've lived and experienced personally. I'm so excited for the women that you get to support as you offer this to them.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Kristen believes strongly that creativity is a sacred invitation to meet ourselves, to meet God, and to find healing and hope. That's what I'm so excited to talk about today, is this idea of creativity as a pathway to healing. So Can you just start by sharing part of your journey, Kristen? How did you discover the importance of creativity in your life and healing?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, first of all, these are like my favorite conversations to have. I would have to say I am one of those people who have always identified as a creative person. I know not everybody has had that experience or that background, but from when I was as little as I can remember, I was always picking up something to create with, crayons, paint. Since I could write, I was writing little stories and children's books. And then of course into keeping diaries in junior high and processing high school and relationships. And in that way, the kind of traditional sense of creativity and art and writing has always been in me. But my story takes a turn, as I think sometimes they do in our lives, where I had to kind of get serious and get practical. And I faced a rejection graduating from high school, hoping to get into an art school, and that dream didn't happen. And so I had to pivot. And that was kind of one of those first creative woundings for me where, maybe this is just a fantasy. Maybe this is just daydreaming. Maybe I should not be taking this seriously. And so I did some exploration in college. I landed in a career, like a major, a career, a path I loved through teaching writing and reading. And it was beautiful, but it was on the outsides of my own personal creativity. And then I entered into marriage and motherhood and military life simultaneously jam-packed on top of one another, and walked through a really deep season of just tragedy and grief and losing our first child, followed by my father just weeks later. And to say my world just ended is not an exaggeration. And in that season, in that year, creativity was not a part of my life in the traditional sense. I was not writing. I was not in touch with that part of myself. And in many ways, as other people who have walked through grief understand, you also can experience this loss of self And so I experienced that in an even deeper way. And in moving through that season of grief, I also began to kind of recover a sense of myself. And I realized just through keeping a medical blog at first, and just through keeping a personal blog to update my family and how we were doing, because we live so far away, there was a certain type of writing I was doing, not intentionally to find healing, but that in and of itself was like, this is really helpful to put this experience into words and share this with other people. Fast forward through other seasons and slowly getting back in touch with journaling and painting and all of those other creative things, there became a time where I still just didn't feel like myself. I really struggled with different kind of post-traumatic stress symptoms and anxiety and depression, and just didn't even like who I was becoming. My husband and I have two beautiful boys, and becoming a mother was really difficult after losing my first child. And I was just hitting a rock bottom. And I felt like life just kept coming at me in really hard ways. And it wasn't what I expected. And creativity actually became a tool for survival for me. There was a really dark season about 7 years ago where I really just did not see a way forward. If I was a person of hope, I was really in a time of lament and that dark night of the soul, and just, I don't know what to do beyond the prayers and the tears and seeking support. I definitely sought support for myself, but if I had to like visualize, it felt very black looking forward. I could not see a way until something shifted in me. And we could say it was a spiritual encounter, perhaps, a divine insight, perhaps, of just recognizing that I don't know the way forward. I can't see a way forward. I can't see something new. I can't see a new possibility. Yet when I make a stroke of ink on my journal page, I just made something new. And that was such a pivotal moment where spiritually, I realized that the creative process was helping me connect with God and with hope. Of like, I can actively create hope in myself through this practice of visually seeing where there was nothing before. I can create something. And that just kind of changed the trajectory for me personally, diving into the catharsis of specifically journaling and then getting, in touch again with my creative self, my artistic self, and moving forward from there in a very empowering way.
Yeah. That's what I'm hearing as you talk about this journey, from childhood to your adult life and the grief and the heartache that you have navigated, real, deep grief, Kristen. And you and I have talked about your story many times throughout the course of our friendship over the years. And I know it's a part of your story you would have never chosen.
Right.
And yet the ways that part of your story has propelled you into this creative space, it's redemption, right? I see redemption and restoration happening every time you create and every time you talk about creativity. And so it's almost like your creative life has, one, helped you become more fully yourself. Like as you talk about returning to this passion from your childhood, and like anchoring this part of your identity and bringing this to life in different seasons of motherhood. But also, I've never thought about creativity as almost this resistance to darkness, like this act of stubborn resistance to the dark, saying, no, I'm going to put pen on paper and I'm going to create something new, almost activating your imagination to envision a new future.
I don't know who said it, but I've heard it said that despair is a lack of imagination. And that hit me because I have always identified as somebody who's creative and who's imaginative. And in those moments where I was kind of experiencing my own despair, to have it framed in that way, it was like, despair is a lack of imagination, but I know I have an imagination. And so it was this active way of engaging spiritually. There's so many other brilliant writers who have written books on this. Rachel Marie Kong, Let There Be Art. I'm thinking of the book Adorning the Dark by Andrew Peterson, Madeleine L'Engle. To tap into this side of creativity, that spiritual side, but also that side that engages with sometimes the different kinds of darkness we might experience in our outer, external circumstances and even whatever's happening internally within us. It's a really, really powerful tool.
Yeah. Well, I'm hearing you say that creativity, engaging our imagination, is both a spiritual practice, and I wholeheartedly agree, as people of faith who believe that we have been made by a creator, a creative creator God, that to live out our identity as image bearers of God means that we are creators. We create. Right. Yeah. And so it's both a spiritual practice and an act. Oh my goodness, an act of it's a spiritual practice, and it's a way of activating our imagination in ways that bring hope. And when you said despair is a lack of imagination, that completely describes the seasons of deep despair that I have lived through in my own life. Those seasons of darkness, it's being unable to imagine a different future.
Right.
It's thinking like the way I feel, what I'm experiencing, the pain, the grief, the hopelessness, depression, whatever it is that I am experiencing now is going to be forever my future.
Right. It feels so permanent.
Yes.
Yeah.
So to engage your imagination feels redemptive. It feels empowering. It feels like that's a muscle I can exercise no matter how I see myself, because I'm thinking about all of the people that you and I have both talked. I've said this about myself. I'm just not creative. I'm not a creative person, even though I know the power of creativity and identify as a writer, which is its own creative act. I think about other creative outlets and I've never felt confident in my creative abilities. So I'm wondering what you might say to people who wouldn't identify as, they say that they just aren't creative.
Yeah. I mean, first, I know that there's going to be a difference between our lived experiences as somebody who does identify as a creative, but having engaged in relationships with other people who don't self-identify in that way, I think it is expanding our understanding of what creativity means or what a creative practice might look like in our life. And so you might not have to wear a label or, put a sticker on yourself like, oh, you're a writer, oh, you're an artist, but I bet you that there are ways, especially if you reflect back on your childhood, perhaps, where there was something creative that you were making. Like the process of making with our hands, something that wasn't there before that we're engaged with, whether it is cooking, baking, gardening, being in, a shop. My dad, I grew up, he was creative in his own way. He would make handmade fishing lures and build train sets with my brother. And I think of my boys who they might not paint at this age, but they'll still build things, they'll make things. And the whole point is not to create this beautiful, polished product that we might think is the end result of like, I'm only creative if I can paint a beautiful painting and hang it on it's so beyond that. It's so much more expansive than that. And ultimately, it can be hard, I feel like in our culture especially, but to disconnect that idea of that product versus that process or the idea of the practice. So if you don't necessarily feel like I'm not a writer, I'm not an artist, I don't feel like I'm good with my hands, like I can barely draw a stick figure, you're still creative, and it's not a matter of talent or skill. For me, I think of it as a matter of like Annie F. Downs is very popular for asking the question, what sounds fun? So I always love to ask people the question like, well, what sounds fun for you in terms of activities you enjoy? And even just beyond that, can we see the creative threads in them that relate to a practice that fits you? And I love this. I actually just saw an Instagram reel about this. You can draw stick figures and think that your art is really bad, and you can 1,000% love that. And that is your creative practice.
It counts.
Yeah,
right? It all counts.
It does involve a little bit of that separation of the results or the judgment. Yeah. But it's getting in touch with that like inner part of yourself where you feel like you can find some flow, some energy, some life, some joy in a tactile way.
The separation of the product from the process. And I'm hearing you say it's actually not about the thing we make as the delight that we take in making, in creating something new and building and taking what is there and using the materials and our imagination to create something that wasn't there before.
Yeah.
And it makes me think of Dr. Kurt Thompson, who has been so influential in my journey and the way I think about even creativity in the world. He talks about how we are constantly moving from imagination to incarnation. That just as God imagined us and then made us imagine the world and made it became real. And then we are moving moving to become more and more real.
Yes.
We are becoming more and more the image of God. We are becoming more fully ourselves. And so this practice of moving from imagination, what we think of, to incarnation, making something real and incarnate and embodied, like that's a spiritual journey. That's embodying our spiritual journey.
Yes.
And so I love even thinking about what brings energy, what brings fun, what brings joy.
Yeah.
And in my work with the clients that I coach, that's such an important question that we often disconnect from because it feels wasteful, it feels unproductive, inefficient. There's so much coming against us, right, in our creative life that disconnects us from ourselves, from the core of who we are, who we are made to be. So I'm wondering, what are some of the obstacles that you see that keep people from engaging with their own creativity?
That's a great question. One of the main obstacles, and this is what I see in a lot of the clients that I work with through coaching, which I myself can completely relate to, is one of time. Like, where is the time for this? The other one is maybe more internal. Maybe time is more of an external barrier, perhaps. Internally, it is a little bit of what you actually just mentioned, that word selfish or even silly, of not, in theme with your podcast, permission slips, right? We don't give ourselves permission to create or to carve out the time because it feels like we don't have permission. We don't have permission. It's a selfish thing. It's a silly thing. It's a wasteful thing. Or I don't have time for this. I'd love to, but I don't have time for this. This is, it's out of the realm of what my life is like right now. I would say that those are probably the most common barriers or hindrances that I see people face. It's so common.
Yeah, right. And I almost wonder if is a lack of understanding of the value and the power of making space for our creativity to flourish. Like, if we really understood this is actually going to make me come more alive, like, how would you define, if you could just explain to someone why you think they need to prioritize their creative space, their creative journey? How would you describe that to them?
I think your creativity and your creative practice is essential to caring for yourself and all the other different ways that you do. And I'm going to actually borrow from Amy McNee, who goes online as Inspired to Write, who just authored a book called We Need Your Art. I defer to her because she articulates this so well, but she is such an advocate for understanding where we take our diet, our physical exercise, our health, and all of those other ways. Like, we take them seriously, we tend to prioritize them, but creativity often gets left out of the conversation. And we see this reflected so much in our society, but it's actually essential to who we are to nourish that creative part of ourselves, because it actually, and it's research-based, creativity, writing, whatever that practice might be in your life, it actually does help make you, like you've been saying, Jillian, more whole, more yourself. And also forget another famous quote of like, the world needs more people who are going to come alive. Like, we need that. And I interrupted myself with the thought, but research shows just how much the creative practice supports our mental, emotional, physical health. I often am hosting journaling workshops and helping people write through their grief. And we talk a little bit about the neuroscience behind that. Like, research actually shows when you can engage with a creative practice like journaling per se for, 20 minutes a few times a week, your symptoms of depression and anxiety actually decrease. Your sleep actually tends to improve. I mean, you can get in there with blood pressure. There's just actually so many health benefits. And, I'm not an expert here, but passing along the knowledge I've inherited, there's just so many health benefits to taking our creativity seriously as something that truly nourishes us and helps us come more alive and be more ourselves and move through those difficult things that are going to come our way.
Wow, I love that reframe, Kristen. Creativity as a nourishing practice that just as important to our health as taking vitamins or eating enough fruits and vegetables, exercising regularly, getting enough sleep and water. What if we viewed creativity and making space for things that bring delight and hope in our lives? Yeah. What if we saw that as just as essential to our health, our overall health, physical and emotional and spiritual and mental?
Yes.
what would that do for us if we invested as seriously in our creativity as any other area of health in our life?
Right. I think it's Julia Cameron who said something about like, you need to take your creative play seriously, like play seriously, because it's so impactful to us. And it's something that is really, truly kind of cast aside, you know, by our society that demands so much of us.
Yeah. Truly. And I find this even, you know, as someone who is working on a book, and I feel a little sheepish even saying that because full disclosure, I finished my book proposal in the fall and I haven't sat at the keyboard to type words for my book in months. Like it's,
well, first, congratulations.
That. Well,
I need to interrupt you and say congratulations because that's huge.
Well, it felt huge at the time, but now it's been months, Kristen, because the work, it actually is work to build in space to practice creativity. And there's, I think part of it is this lie that I believe that I have to be productive. Like I have to have something to show for the practice. I love that you're just like bringing that and discrepancy between our product versus our process, our practice of creativity versus what we produce and make. But I'm thinking about people who maybe like me have so many things, see the value of creativity, but have so many other things competing for our time and attention and energy. Where would you encourage us to start? What would be some little ways that we could start to honor our creativity a little bit more?
Yeah. So if we get a little bit more into like the practical nuts and bolts of things of like, how do we actually implement this thing that sounds like a really good idea? We're having this buy-in, we understand it. How do we actually make time for it? Again, like I said, a lot of my clients, myself included, I know like you just said that you are asking the same thing. Like, how do I actually do this? How do I find the time for this? I don't think that there is going to be a one answer that fits all sizes. I don't think it's necessarily a black or white answer. Again, I think it's a way to think creatively. One of my main pieces of advice per se that I share with people is to think about what can you do within this season of your life right now. Morgan Harper Nichols, to shout out another name out there, she talks about like, what can you do within the limits of your life? So just thinking about, where are you in this present season, whether you're thinking about, short term this month or in this spring or in this summer, what is life like for you right now? What are those things that you are 100% committed to, those responsibilities, those things that you actually must commit to and show up? Are there any things on your life list right now that maybe you could pause for a minute or that you could say no to? Are you overcommitting yourself? Do you need to say no to something else so you can say yes to a creative practice? That's thinking really big picture, and that can even still overwhelm people. So then I advise, as many other creatives do, and they share this information. So this is not an idea that I'm going to claim ownership over, but it is to make things really small and bite-sized and think creatively about within your life right now, within what your days look like. Can you find any little moments in your day, in the margins, where maybe you could just journal for a page for 5 minutes? Maybe it's first thing in the morning when you're having your cup of coffee. Maybe if you're in a season of motherhood, if you're a mom and you're doing school pickups and drop-offs or chauffeuring, maybe it's in the car for 5 minutes and you keep your journal there. Maybe it's at night on your nightstand. Removing any constraints that you're putting on yourself of what you think it's supposed to look like. Having these high expectations, making them smaller, more manageable, and even again, really thinking outside of the box. If you're in a season where life is asking so much of you, and you really are struggling to find that 5 minutes, that 10 minutes, whatever you might want it to be. What does your day already look like where you can be creative in ways that you might not think about it? Like so many of us have our smartphones on us at all times. Is there a moment in your day where you're just noticing? Just start by noticing and paying attention. Is there something that sparks a moment of delight in you or wonder or like curiosity? Like, can you capture that with a phone on your camera? Can you jot down what it was that you saw in your notes app? Even like this might not fit for everybody, but like I often talk with my cousin about how motherhood is a creative practice, or even just weaving in fun things for you. Like I'm in the season where I'm still packing my two boys their lunch boxes. Can I be creative and just have a little fun when I'm packing their lunchbox? Can I make a little note? Can I do something that's a little extra thoughtful? I don't have to think about, I'd really like to spend 3 hours in my studio today painting. That would be lovely, but that might not be a thing for every day.
Right.
But how can I engage with that creative part of myself where I notice that little bit of a stirring, awakening, delight of like, how can I just contribute or make something in this moment that I already have and think out of the box with that? Because all of those moments, even the daydreaming, even the thinking about writing, even the thinking about what you want to do, of course we want to go from like the thinking to the doing, but it all counts. It's all feeding that creative well. So like, how can you just, a lot of times with my clients, I talk about how can you find those touch points daily with your creativity? How can you do something that just feeds it a little bit? And maybe you do need to like carve out a Saturday morning or get creative with that. Maybe you do want a longer chunk of time. For me, I had to give myself permission to ask for help because my journey was unfolding when my boys were very little and I was the primary caregiver, stay-at-home mom, and my husband was deployed. I had to learn that it was okay to ask for help, to have some time to myself to make and create, because when I did that, I was a more present, pleasant mom.
Yes. Yes. Well, and you're talking about noticing the things that spark joy in us, what sparks delight in us, and following that spark as almost an invitation to create something new.
That's a great word.
And I hear you saying, I just love all these creative examples, outside the box examples of how to practice exercising that creativity muscle, where it's not even about what we're doing. Again, just to go back to what you said earlier, it's about building a muscle and a way of seeing the world through a more creative lens that allows us to create in those margin spaces. And talking about motherhood as a creative, an opportunity for creativity. I love that you said, what sparks joy in me as I'm packing my kids' lunchbox, as opposed to what's going to be fun for them.
Yeah.
Because I think as moms, it's really easy for us to think about creating all these activities and experiences for our kids that bring them life and joy while we wither.
Yes.
And helping our kids flourish while we lose that spark. And so whether it's getting a babysitter or asking a spouse or a friend to watch your kids so you have space and time to create, or integrating things that bring you life and joy into your days as a mom.
And our kids need to see that too. And even if you are somebody who doesn't have kids, I mean, the people in our life benefit from witnessing our creative practices too. And just as a short story, as part of my like nourishing my own creative life, I committed to a 6-week art class recently, and it was Saturday mornings, and I knew my kids would be at home for some of those mornings, and it was a virtual class. And my youngest he's always very interested in what I'm doing. So like my art is oil pastels or painting. He at this age is like open, which I love. This is about childhood and we all shift out of it, unfortunately, but he is so open to the playfulness and the trying of everything. So when he sees me in my studio painting along with this art teacher and he says, "Can I join you?" Yeah, pull up a seat. And he wants to try to do it too. And I am open for that. I have pivoted over the years. I think it just took me a journey, a progression to realize that I could give myself a creative practice and engage with it and allow my boys the gift of witnessing their mom making something in a way that might not only inspire them, but also see me more as, I don't know if this will make sense, but a whole person who is engaged in this creative practice that brings life. And then it sparks things in them. And hopefully that also gives them permission to do the same as they get older.
I love that you're shifting, again, that mindset around creativity from this is something for me that I want to do to I want to model for my kids. I want to model for my family and my friends and the people in my life what it means to allow myself to be who I am and to do things that bring life and joy, because by doing so, I'm giving them permission to do the same thing. And I'm coming back in my mind too. I think it was Howard Thurman that you were referencing earlier, the quote, "Don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive, because what the world needs is people who are fully alive." And so I'm thinking about if we can shift our mindset to thinking, the world needs me to create what only I can create in the world. And not necessarily because of what I produce or how I'm going to share it, but as I exercise that creative muscle and practice creativity, it's going to cultivate something in me that allows something to come into the world that wouldn't be there if I didn't make it. And again, not that that's even about like what we build with our hands. And I love all the examples of creativity that you gave, whether it's playing with trains or baking or cooking or writing someone a card or painting or yard work or making a garden. Like the world world is going to be more beautiful.
Yeah. It makes me think of
what we're creating.
Of Maggie Smith, the poet who just wrote, I think actually it's maybe a couple years now, but she wrote, "You could make this world beautiful," or "No, you could make this place beautiful." I always think of her and her work, and a little bit too of Scott Erickson, who talks about like art and creativity as a contribution. Like we're conduits, and we can think spiritually of this, of like of beauty, of by becoming more ourselves, by offering different things into the world, we are contributing to the healing of other people around us. And that is a holy, sacred thing.
Absolutely. Kurt Thompson talks about that as well, that we are made, part of our purpose is to create artifacts of goodness and beauty in the world.
Oh, I love that.
And so yes, absolutely. This is a holy calling. And so it's not just about us doing something for fun that doesn't have purpose and wastes time. No. This is a spiritual practice that is part of our embodiment of God in the world.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, you have talked a little bit about journaling, and I know that you're really passionate about journaling. You offer journaling workshops. You have your Pen and Men collective to help people do some of this writing and processing through their grief. For people who think, okay, I maybe journaling, I can see the value of it, but I don't know how, or it's overwhelming, or I hate journaling, I've done it in the past. What's some of your advice around journaling?
Well, that's great. I love this question. I would say one of the things that I am a pretty strong believer in, and this might surprise some people based on my work, is that I really think people should start with a blank journal and do a type of journaling called stream of conscious journaling, where you are really just listening to what's going on in your thoughts and in your inner self, and you're putting it onto the page. An example of this would be Julia Cameron's morning pages. The unpopular opinion I have is I'm actually kind of against those journals that are heavily prompted in questions. They can be great and they have their time and their purpose and their place. And if you love them, use them. But I found if you really want to tap into that healing power that journaling has, those emotional, mental benefits, spiritual benefits even, if you can just write, Julia Cameron prescribes 3 pages, but even just 1 page daily, if you could, 5 minutes of just whatever is going on in here in your internal world, your mind, your heart, your questions, your thoughts, your experiences, the things that you think don't even matter, your to-do list, your work. Like if you can just, kind of process that and release that and get that onto the page, it is extremely powerful just to practice listening through writing. And that connects you with yourself. That connects you with the spirit. If you're a person of faith, that can even become that listening spiritual practice through writing. I would also add to the great Julia Cameron's wisdom of the morning pages, where people sometimes get stuck, is still not finding it super helpful or transformative, or they're looking for some type of additional support where, we all kind of fear sometimes facing that blank page, or we don't know what to do with our thoughts, or like, okay, I just released everything. Now what? We kind of are bent towards wanting some type of a resolution that perhaps we're facing things that are unresolvable. So like one of the things I recommend is to find points of pivot through journaling as you're listening. So this is what I offer through the journals I've created, through the workshops. It's to first and foremost practice that listening, practice just transcribing your inner narrator, even if you're annoyed with her. Even if you would rather not process through any of these difficult thoughts or feelings, even if you're feeling shame around them, first just get them onto the page. But if I were to offer just a really generic, like umbrella of advice, it would be to see if before you finish your journaling time, you could end by reflecting some type of comfort or love or reassurance or gratitude back to yourself. And again, this is where journaling can be a spiritual practice. It could be a form of prayer, or maybe you're pouring out, but then you're also making space to receive. You're making space to tap into the creator, right? The divine source of love or healing or comfort. Can you also begin to transcribe that part of your spirituality onto the page so that you don't feel like you're left scrambling or stuck or deeper than when you started? I think there's a lot of benefits to pivots. And if you really want some support in that, obviously I have a lot of resources where I'd love to point people. But I hope that makes sense. Overall, I would just invite people to see if they can just start listening to themselves and see what happens. It's more powerful than it sounds.
Totally. And until you've practiced it for a while, you're probably not going to experience transformation day one, but until you start to practice it, you can't experience it, right? Yeah. You can't imagine what it'll be like until you embody that experience.
Exactly.
I'm wondering what resources, and I want to come back to something you just said, but what sort of resources do you have that people could find on your website or other places?
Yeah, thank you for asking. I've created 2 signature faith-based journals. One is called Rest, a journal for lament, and the other is called Rise, a journal for perseverance. They're for kind of 2 seasons or 2 moments of life, depending on what you're going through. And they both offer these frameworks that are therapeutically inspired and inspired by scripture. They incorporate both, and they offer a loose framework for processing your thoughts through these difficult seasons, depending on what you need. And I am a personal fan of them. Obviously, I created them because
they're beautiful.
Thank you.
They're beautiful.
They offer a structure, kind of like guideposts of how you can help your thoughts form, a little bit of that spiritual formation process, but it's loose enough where I'm not telling you what to think or how to think, or I'm not giving you super specific questions. It's more of a way of unfolding your thoughts in a way that can be really helpful. So those are my 2 journals. I would love for people to learn more about those. I do the Pen and Men Collective, where I think you'd already mentioned at the top of the show, where I do actually share prompts because people do really enjoy prompts and curiosity, and I'm hearing from other people in ways where, oh, I never thought of it that way. Oh, I never thought to ask that question. So I do offer monthly prompts. We do virtual writing rooms. Those are kind of my 2 main resources. And then I also have some different kinds of workshops. I do a signature workshop called Write Your Grief. I'm hosting this monthly where I loosely base it on my Rest journal for lament, but it is a time to write your grief in a way that is more expressive in a safe, compassionate way to help you kind of move through whatever you might be feeling there. I do a lot of fun things. And it sounds strange to say fun when we're talking about grief or trauma or just life being hard, whatever it might be. But there is a lightness that comes from it, a deep, deep rooted joy that comes from this catharsis that we can find through writing or creativity.
Yeah. And I love that you mentioned when you were talking about morning pages and the practice of stream of consciousness journaling. I love that you mentioned this as a way of noticing our internal dialogue, of just noticing what's happening inside, which is the most important step to begin any of our own inner healing work, right? We have to notice where we are. And as a coach, I talk a lot with people about how we have to, in order to move forward to where we want to be, we have to grow some awareness around our current reality, where we actually are today. And so that practice of journaling has been so transformative for me. And I love that you offered that sort of pivot at the end where we start with this stream of consciousness dump. And as I suggest this to a lot of people in my life and clients and friends, and they're like, I don't know what to say, or I don't want to read these things, or I don't want any of this on paper. It's so ugly. And I tell them what I think it was Julia Cameron said, which is you don't read them. You don't. Like, no one can read them. Don't go back. Like you're just trying to get it out.
Burn them even. Yeah.
Yes, totally. But then the shift that you offered us is something that's actually been transformative in my own life, of getting out what's inside, the ugly. And even if it's like, I don't know how I feel right now. I don't know what to say. I don't know what I'm thinking. Like just all of the ugly inner dialogue, or hopeful. I don't always have ugly things to say, but then making space at the end. For me, I've developed this practice of asking God questions and saying, okay, like, here's all these things. God, what do you want me to know today?
Yes.
What do you want me to know? And just pausing in silence and trusting. And this has taken a lot of practice over years, but just trusting the kind, loving voice that I hear that may sound in my head like my own voice, but trusting that the words that come are from Him for my comfort and care. So I love
beautiful.
that.
And I love to add on to that just really briefly. The thing that I just marvel at with journaling is, and this doesn't happen every time, but it is as you are kind of just clearing your thoughts out, you're listening to yourself, you're naming things, little, whatever they are, even frivolous things, that there is often a moment of insight that just like, it's like this revelation of like, it's like this new thought, like a new thought was born and all of a sudden appeared because I was taking the time to just listen, to just be present. Something new was able to emerge that I did not plan for. I didn't expect. Right. It's a complete surprise and delight. And of course, it's something we have no control over. But by showing up to that practice, we make room for that kind of revelation to appear.
Ooh, I love that. And isn't that the heart of creativity, is something new that we didn't expect, which I think is why creativity feels so vulnerable too, is that we can't control it. We can't control the outcome. We think we should be able to, but it's opening ourselves up to the possibility of something new that we can't control.
Yeah.
I love this conversation so much. Kristen, thank you for sharing your wisdom and insight. Before we wrap up, is there any permission slip that you would want to give to the people listening?
Yeah, I think I would just sum up maybe some of the heart of our conversation of just saying you have permission to create and honor that in a way that is sacred and not selfish and not silly.
Oh, yes and amen. Thanks for being here, friend.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Permission Slips. I hope this conversation will give you permission to explore what creativity could look like in your life in ways that spark joy and delight and help you become more fully yourself. Remember, your life matters, and so does your creativity, more than you know.